It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about today. Mind focused on one word. One word has been stuck in my head all day long. I read this article over at Bloomberg News, and it is stuck in my head all day long. This columnist over there, in an article titled "Raising the Capital Gains Tax Would Be Un-American," and he goes through his argument on why it would be un-American to raise taxes on rich people. And the one word that was in there, valorization. And you go, why would you use the word valorization when you're talking about wealth? He said the values that the U.S. should prioritize are the valorization of wealth. That means rich people are good, poor people are bad. Rich people are special, poor people are not. Rich people are, well, go down the list. Entitled, destined by God. Go down the list of all of the craziness that we've been told that somehow rich people are better, and while the rest of us are not. This columnist, he wants that to be our value. And immediately my mind went in a bunch of places. Because I read through the article and I'm going, this is another, basically apologist kind of nonsensical argument so that we don't tax rich people and use it to build our infrastructure or fund education or healthcare or any of that stuff. But this goes into a different world than just being an apologist or just being a propagandist or just being an apologist, whatever. It goes beyond just going, oh no, we're going to do the bidding of the rich people because they're paying us a lot of money. This goes beyond that. This is the valorization of wealth. He said there are three things that we should prioritize in this country. 3 things. That's it. Nothing else. Valorization of wealth. Encouraging people to save, encouraging savings, and encouragement of children. And I'm going, hold on. Those 2 are kind of counterintuitive. If you have children, you're going to be poor because it costs a lot of money to raise kids. So I'm not quite getting the first one, most important. Honor rich people. And immediately my mind went to, imagining, a big white wig, telling people, let them eat cake. This is where my mind went. And it goes into some weird places because then it allows us to justify all of the horrible things that have happened to poor people over the years. The fact that we haven't funded education properly for poor people. The fact that we haven't done enough to find good quality jobs for people. Go down the list. The fact that every budget in every state across this country is trying to figure out how to slash and burn social services. And then justifying it by saying, well, they just don't work hard enough. Again, back to this frame that, the wealthy are industrious and they work hard and they're smart, when the reality is most of them just lucky. Most of them just were born in the right address. And we've seen the numbers. I mean, like 2/3 of the people who are wealthy were born that way. Yes, this country does give people opportunity. It does allow people to gain wealth. But, as Obama was saying, back years ago, you didn't do it alone. You did it as part of a system of laws and infrastructure that was built by we the people. And, oh, by the way, don't forget the workers. And one of the things that we do masterfully in this country is we idolize the men who built America. There was actually a TV series on this. And we talked about, the captains and the titans of industry. Not so much about the people who actually did the physical labor. They were just cogs in the wheel. They were just negatives on the balance sheet. And this was driving me crazy all day today, because it got me thinking in this term of, what is the American dream? Because this guy makes the argument, and it's kind of a twisted argument, that and I guess it goes back to the Trumpian kind of argument of, we just want the good people to immigrate here. The people who have connections to get an Einstein Award because she did the naked Playboy thing. Yes, I'm talking about Melania. We want those people. We don't want those poor stiffs who are walking across the border who actually do produce something, picking our crops and doing the crappy jobs that nobody else will do. At least not at the wage that corporate America, the wealthy, are willing to pay. I mean, this is just, there's so much here that's driving me insane. But he goes through this whole thing of saying that we can't raise capital gains on rich people because, well, then it'll discourage immigrants from coming here to seek their fortune because, and this is important, because America has always been the land where the streets are paved with gold and you go to make your fortunes. And his argument is we want that myth. We want that belief out there so that people will come, and then obviously we can exploit them. But his view was it's okay that we have inequality. Inequality's fine. It's the myth we want. We want this view that you can be a gazillionaire here, that you can be as immoral as you want, you can hoard as much as you want, you can gorge yourself with as much as you want. And it got me thinking about Rome. Of course, my mind is going in all these weird spots. I'm thinking about the vomitoriums that were, the wealthy were just gorging themselves with every delicacy they could possibly come up with, and just more and more and more. They couldn't consume enough, and they'd have to go and they'd have to release, they'd have to purge, and then they would go right back at it while people in the streets were hungry. And you look at that here in this country and you're going, we've got people who are so incredibly wealthy. They've got more money than generations will spend. And we're told by our government that that's good. They know what to do with it. They're smart people. And it'll trickle down to the rest of us and we'll get jobs and all this stuff. Is it working for the mass of people? Honestly and truthfully, we've got huge numbers of people in poverty in this country. We've got children who go to bed hungry. We've got veterans who go to bed on the streets. But we've got Bill Gates, and we've got the Tesla guy, and we've got that Walton family. We've got our oligarchy. We've got our knights and our nobles and our kings and our queens who are basically saying, let them eat cake. When the workers at Amazon were trying to organize, Jeff Bezos spent a handsome ransom to keep that union out, $200 billion. And then his response is, well, maybe we need to do a little bit better. Maybe we need to look at some things where people are literally defecating in bags to keep up their productivity. So I'm looking at this article and it's got me losing my mind, because I start thinking about what's the American dream. I start thinking about, how I, as a kid, was taught to believe that if in this country, that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, that you could get ahead. That it wasn't about making a killing. It was about leading a good life, leading the best life you could. It was about doing a little bit better so that your kids could do a little bit better. It was about a lot of that. It wasn't about, I'm going to be the richest man in the world and then I will make everyone else suffer. It's crazy. But it got me thinking in those terms again. And we often hear, money doesn't make you happy. Look at Bezos, look at Gates. They're getting divorced like everybody else. What does it take? And when you have the kind of wealth that our billionaire class has been given, because they're taxed at a much different rate than you and I. If you're swinging a hammer or driving a truck, or as Warren Buffett has said, he pays a higher tax rate than his secretary. There's class war in this country, and his class is winning, but they shouldn't be. So why are they winning? Well, one, they pay a lot of people like this guy to write articles that tell us, you know what? Inequality is good for us. Keeps those working people working harder. Keeps them striving to be rich, like those people. And it's never going to happen. And when you've got CEOs who make 1,000 times what the average worker makes, never going to get there. When you got the birth lottery winners who are never going to have to work a day in their lives and never want or strive for anything, sorry, you're never going to work hard enough to compete with them. Look, I believe in that ethic, that working class ethic that I was raised believing in. That if you do work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead. The American dream is leading your best life. Free of hunger, free of want. But what it's turned into is this kind of, if you have money, you're good. If you're poor, you're bad. And I don't think that's right. And what's interesting to me is we're seeing these organizing campaigns going on. We're seeing these groups coming out and saying, look, we're not taking these crappy jobs anymore. We're not doing this anymore. We're not going to be the ones who are going to clean up after the wealth class. We're not going to be the ones who continue to line their pockets at the expense of our children and our families. We demand better. And there was an article over at the Philadelphia Inquirer. They're talking about restaurant workers and that there's a labor shortage. Anytime I hear there's a labor shortage, I then go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to find out how high their wages are rising. Because I did learn in Economics 101 that when there's a shortage of something, the price of it goes up. This is pretty simple. It's that X thing that they used to love to show us all the time. So if there's a shortage, price goes up. If there's a surplus over supply, prices go down. Simple. But we're told massive shortage. And we're told that the reason there's a shortage is, well, one, people just don't work like they used to. And two, it's because the government is giving them all of this food stamps and all of this unemployment and all of this help. Giving them all this money. And I find it interesting because in the article where they're talking about how horrible the conditions are in the restaurant industry and the food service industry, especially now during pandemic time when people are insufferable, this group, Miss and Place, a Philadelphia-based restaurant staffing firm, they did a survey, 2,000 hourly staff, line cooks across the country. What they found is that 41% of the people that they surveyed still employed, still had the job. 26 left the industry, I'm tired of this. 20 said they were looking for the right opportunity. 7 were concerned about COVID. 6% said they were staying out because, hey, I got better unemployment money. I don't have to go seek a job because the job that I had hasn't called me back. And I'm making more money. Basic economics, basic self-economic interest, something we say that is something valorization of wealth. Poor people getting unemployment, no valor in that. Rich people not paying their fair share of taxes, valor. It's crazy if you stop and you think about it. But it's what we do again, isn't it? We judge, if you work for a living, well, you've got to work for peanuts. But if the hardest day's labor you do is shifting money from one pocket to the other, well, that's a hard day's work. But it does throw out this myth that, well, nobody's working because of the unemployment. What it's done is it's given people some options, of which I'm in favor of. And one of the things we're going to hear about soon is, Joe Biden's talking about universal pre-K. Well, Josh Hawley and the Republicans are saying, no, we want to give families money. They're now the party of socialism. Remember those Republicans? Socialism bad? Now they're in favor of it. Now they're in favor of giving families money and understand what they really want to do. The end goal here has always been paying families to educate their own children, and government paying religious people to just mass produce the quiverful folks. Pump out units every 9-10 months, and then cash in. That's what they really want. But what's weird is they don't put a negative connotation on that. It's just those people, who have those kids over there, the single mother who's got a couple of kids who's struggling to get by. They're bad. But the good folks on the other side who, we're giving help to because they're good people. They're good religious people. Somehow they're good. And it's this weird kind of moment that we're in where I struggle with the policy decisions we're going to be making, because I see this as part of the equation where we're going to, unfortunately, make these decisions from a policy standpoint. But I'm looking at the restaurant industry, and they're talking about, just this huge labor shortage. And again, I go back to, where's the money? Evidently, they're offering bonuses, little enticement, little cheese for you, little something, little taste. Don't get used to it, to get you in the door. Much like they did after the Trump tax cuts, corporate America felt a little, not a lot. I mean, people were not happy with it, because corporate America got tons of money. The wealthy lined their pockets, and they felt a little bad about it. So they gave one-time bonuses. You saw like Home Depot gave like $250. There were a number of companies who spent more money on promoting the fact that they gave a bonus than they actually gave in bonuses, to quell our anger so that we don't push back against this idea of valorization of wealth, that somehow the wealthy are better, that somehow the wealthy are noble or smarter or whatever. When the reality is most of them were just luckier. And folks who are struggling at the bottom, unlucky. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that at all. We talk about, how do we take care of our wealth class? I wish we would spend as much time helping the poor, helping those poor inner city kids like I was as a child. I wish we'd spend more time helping those folks than we do worrying about some rich guy and his tax benefits. He's not going to miss a meal. But those kids that Ronald Reagan snatched this lunch program from over the summers, that did cost people a meal. And for the party of family values to come out and say something stupid like, we care about the children, give me a break. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1948. That was the day United Electrical Workers voted to strike at Univis Lens Company in Dayton, Ohio. Univis made safety lenses and instrumental optics. The UE was well established in the area manufacturing plants. Once organized, Univis fought the UE's presence at every chance they could. When the contract expired at the end of April, Univis refused to negotiate. First came the injunctions limiting picketing. This was followed by a vigorous decertification campaign. Foremen made intimidating personal visits to workers' homes, offering raises and personal loans to coerce no votes. When the UE lost the election in late July, the company announced wage increases for returning workers and firings for the remaining strikers. Workers stuck together and the strike continued. By the 26th, police swamped the picket lines, beating top UE organizers and arresting hundreds. 2 days later, the company offered a settlement for all but 11 strikers. The members refused. Then, the House Un-American Activities Committee came to town to begin a red-baiting inquisition of the UE district. The city's unions were outraged at the beatings and arrests. They walked off their jobs to bolster the picket lines and were met with tear gas. Governor Herbert called in the National Guard on August 2nd. 1,500 troops rolled into town in Sherman tanks with machine guns trained on the strikers. Scabs were escorted through plant gates between rows of fixed bayonets. Area residents, furious at the virtual martial law, flooded the governor with angry protests until troops were finally withdrawn. The strike ended in victory, with workers winning most of their demands. All but 5 were reinstated, and by the following April, the NLRB voided the decertification election.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of the things I think this pandemic has shown us, I think it's shown us how vulnerable workers are to protect themselves in the workplace, especially if an employer just doesn't buy any of it. And we've heard those stories. For me, I was saying all during the pandemic, where's OSHA? Why wasn't Trump's OSHA out in front protecting people? I know our unions were doing a great job where they could, but you need the federal government. You need state laws to stand up and protect people. And I'm hoping now we look back and say, you know what, this is never going to happen again. We need to go forward. We need to make sure that future workers never have to endure what we just went through, which is why I look at New York. Their General Assembly just passed the New York HERO Act. I guess this is just waiting for Cuomo's signature. This would, as I understand it, be the first law in the country to mandate permanent standards to guard against airborne infectious diseases in the workplace. This, to me, is an important piece of legislation. And here to share some thoughts on the New York HERO Act, I've asked Maritza Silva-Farrell to come talk with us. She's the executive director of Align and a coordinator with New York Essential Workers Coalition. Their website, alignny.org. We'll get links out on social media. Also, protectnyheroes.org. We'll get those out. Maritza, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thank you so much for having me.
So walk me through this. What is the New York HERO Act?
Well, what the New York HERO Act is essentially, hopefully, if it actually signed by the governor, it will become a law that will create clear, enforceable standards, specifically for how every business can keep workers safe and avoid any other costly shutdowns. Essentially, workers will be able to create worker committees. Through these worker committees, they can decide what kind of safety standards they need in the workplace to be able to continue working. The legislation specifically points out to retaliation protections for workers who do not feel safe, for them to not be retaliated against. So far, what we've seen through this pandemic is that there are huge corporations, as you were talking about earlier, like Amazon, that, you know, if a worker complains about not having enough personal protection equipment, of not having hand sanitizing, then the worker will get fired just by speaking out. So This law essentially creates airborne infectious disease standards, enforceable, and on the top of that, allows for workers to create their own worker committees so that they can come out with protections and work with the employer. And that would essentially protect us from any future pandemics or diseases as we know it.
Yeah, for me, I mean, this is one of those things, and I've been saying this all during the last year plus. This is the reason that you have a union. This is the reason that you have representation on the job. And for me, the big push should be making sure that every worker in this country has the ability to join and form unions. And I'm glad our president is moving in that direction. But to highlight your point about if you squawk too much, you get fired, I look at the guy from Trader Joe's who put a suggestion in the suggestion box saying, hey, this is how you're not protecting us. This is how I would like to see it. And they basically wrote him a letter saying, you're fired. You're not Trader Joe's material. Your time here is at will. There's the door. Good luck, buddy. And that should never happen.
Absolutely, Rick. That's the situation. And this worker would have been protected by the state law if we have New York HERO already in place, right? So I think here the example of the Trader Joe worker is an example of many, many workers who have been retaliated against just by asking for simple health and safety protections in the workplace. During this pandemic, if there is anything that we have to learn, is that we have to work collaboratively, right? It's not about only the employer being the bad person here, or the employee trying to just take advantage of the employer. It is about actually protections for all. At the end of the day, our communities are the ones who have been affected. So right now, what we're waiting is for Governor Cuomo really to sign this bill, and we have until tomorrow. If the governor does not sign this bill, it will be very telling in terms of how important it is for him to reopen our state without having an enforceable protection for workers as much as for our communities.
Now, as I understand, the mayor of New York, de Blasio, is saying, I guess July 1st is the day you're planning on swinging the doors wide open. So it's my view that I think, at least my view is that at least I would want to have the protections of knowing that I have the ability to protect myself. And part of this legislation that I understand, and you're obviously the one who's the expert on this, in my view. This is, protocols for face masks, PPE, the social distancing stuff, airflow standards, so that you have recirculation, things like that. This doesn't sound like it's too onerous. It doesn't sound to me like it's too high a bar to ask for employers to do. I'm curious your thoughts.
I mean, some of the employers, at least the ones who are responsible, are already doing this because it's in their own benefit.
Right.
But here we are, a day close to pass this legislation, and we have some folks from the business community, mainly the ones who are the big ones in New York City and New York State, coming out against this legislation. And they're actually saying that they're going to be spending even more money because of these protections. It's basically it's common sense. Folks are already investing in this kind of equipment, and is responsible not only for the workers but for themselves, because in that way they don't have to shutdowns, right? Like many of the shutdowns happen because workers got sick, and therefore you pass it on to the families and communities. What the other piece I would say actually that's interesting is that we are hearing that, vaccines now is like, well, we all are opening up our city. Things are just like nothing is happening, right? Like everything is normal. People are getting vaccinated. That's fantastic. We're all happy about that. And we are feeling that, we're actually one of the privileged countries to be able to access to vaccination. So that's great. But it's only one piece. That's why we have to make sure that it's clear. Vaccination is only one piece of the broader set of protections against COVID-19, right? In New York, we have to ensure that any kind of variant that might come around, does not exacerbate any other diseases in the future. So right now, we hope and we are really encouraging the governor to do the right thing here, sign this bill intact as it is, and ensure that workers will have these protections as much as businesses.
Now we're in this moment of political polarization, where you've got the anti-mask people and damn it, I'm not wearing a mask. And we're along political lines on this. But as I was reading about this New York Hero Act actually has bipartisan support, correct?
That's correct. We passed with bipartisan support in the Assembly and the Senate. And in the Senate, actually, we have majority of support. We have the majority of members of the Senate voted in favor. And the only Assembly members who came out against the bill were the Assembly members who actually carry on the message of the large business community, which was, well, I'm going to be spending more money on PPEs, extra $100 to buy protection personal equipment, things of that nature. When we all know very clearly that folks are already required, and not required, actually, they are following the guidelines. And this will make it so that it becomes required.
Yeah, but when you start talking about this, and again, I'm going to ask your opinion more than anything. Who are the workers that we're talking about protecting? Because like anything, it comes down to who's deserving of help and who isn't. Are we talking about restaurant workers? Are we talking about grocery workers? Because remember, these were the people who we were told were our heroes. These are the folks who are essential, the people who work at the fish market, the people who drive the trucks, the people who do the work at the bottom of the economic scale. Not so much, the people who are working on Wall Street, they're going to be fine anyway, but, the lower rung. So how much of this do you think, if it doesn't get signed, has to do with who you're talking about protecting?
I mean, we're protecting the workers who have been called heroes, essentially here. And you're totally right, Rick. We're talking about workers that for too long have been the most vulnerable workforce here, right? Like the same workers who are in the farms, picking up our potatoes, the workers who are actually feeding our families, the workers who are at the front lines of this pandemic and have been at the front line of this pandemic. And let me be clear, this legislation will protect workers who are not unionized and workers who are unionized as well. because not every union sector, not every union workplace has established health and safety protections, as you imagine, for example, in the healthcare industry, right? So this would apply for workers who are, we were hearing stories, for example, of workers in the laundry worker center, workers who are working in the commercial waste system. Many of the large commercial waste owners of these cutters, they just want the workers to work fast, and they just want them to do their job. They don't care about what conditions, right? And some of those workers are represented, so unions have to step up, even supporting workers like UPS, as we hear what's been happening with our good friends from the Teamsters here in New York. They have to go on a strike and fight, right? So similarly, we're hearing also stories in the restaurant business. Just you're talking about the restaurant business. New York is known for our restaurants. We love our restaurants, we love our waiters. But one of the things that are happening here is that those workers are not getting the protections that they need in the workplace. And they are forced to work sometimes in conditions that aren't really acceptable. So what this law will do is actually protect all of those vulnerable workers who, even before the pandemic, have been affected by the way the system works, which you're talking about today, like, the race to the bottom concept here, including, I want to just say one more thing, Amazon workers, right? The largest corporation in the world has not been able to provide basic protections to those workers. During this time, when workers are trying to unionize, the same workers are raising their concerns. And what do? They have union busting, right? And now what we see here in New York is that we have a moment in which we can hold at least some of what they're doing, hold them accountable on. And that will be in terms of health and protections for the health and safety protections for the workers.
So let me flip this around for a second then, because, I'm with you on this. We do need protections, but here's the thing. We've got OSHA. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration is supposed to be that frontline help to help protect workers when they're on the job. They fell down. And I would argue, not just did they fall down, I believe they were ordered down. I believe they were deliberately defunded. I believe they were deliberately restrained because that administration of the former guy was all about deregulation, all about shifting corporate power even further into the hands of the wealthy and away from the rest of us. What's to say you pass this? And same thing. There's no enforcement. They give it lip service, but there's nothing there. What do you say to the person who goes, okay, you passed the law, well, nobody's going to enforce it?
Well, we have actually specific language in the legislation that we make so that we have, for example, private right of action, ensure that there are enforcement mechanisms where the employers will actually have to pay liquidated damages in some cases, like they will have to pay for workers who are raising concerns. Obviously, as I said earlier, this will be a space for workers and employers to be able to collaborate on this. We want businesses to continue to function, but we want them to actually change the way they're doing things with their workers. So the enforcement mechanism is going to be the number one thing here. It's not just about passing the bill. It's about passing a bill that will be enforceable, but also allowing workers to be able to come together with these worker committees, right? And that is critical part of this bill because it allows for workers to be able to come together, which you don't see happening, for example, on Amazon.
Right.
Right. So that is a change, and the differences between what we've seen in other legislation.
Yeah, but if you listen to Amazon, the door is always open. You can always come in and you can always share your thoughts. My problem with this is, these worker committees all sound great until you start looking at the fact that most states are at-will employment states. And if the boss hears something they don't want to hear, much like the Trader Joe's guy, there's the door. Only they won't say it has to do with the safety committee because we believe in safety. They'll come up with any other reason. I just didn't like his shoes. Whatever. That's my concern. Which again, why I keep coming back to. We need to get people joining and forming unions to get the protection of law behind them there, so they're empowered to stand up, speak out, and defend themselves.
I mean, absolutely. That was going to be my second point, Rick. At the end of the day, collective bargaining agreements and forming a union and ensuring that there is a voice in the workplace, it starts there, right? Not only for this kind of legislation. This legislation creates a path for workers to be able to feel empowered, to speak up, to be able to come together, particularly in workplaces where we've seen that there has been retaliation, where there has been a lot of anti-union practices. So that's the beauty of this law that would allow also for unions to continue to enforce some of these kind of legislations. And lastly, I would say that the Department of Labor, as well as the Department of Health, will be enforcing these standards as the law is established at this moment.
Are there any other states considering language like what's in this HERO Act? Is there anything out there that's doing this? What you're proposing, or what's already been passed? Anybody else doing this?
No, I was just gonna say. I mean, if we are to pass this and actually have this legislation become a law, we'll be the first state in the country with an airborne infectious disease standard ever created, right? So at the end of the day, if we have a law like this in New York, we will also serve as a model for other parts of the country, particularly right now when we're seeing that folks are talking about worker committees, as you're saying. Workers are talking about what kind of health and safety standards they need. So there is a piecemeal of things that people are doing, but not a bill or a legislation or a law per se that is as comprehensive as New York HERO.
So last question I've got for you. How can we help? What is it that our listeners can do? What is it folks on social media can do to help move this in the direction to get the governor, Andrew Cuomo, to sign this into law?
Well, here's one thing that is very important to do. I mean, for my folks in the labor movement who I hope they're listening in today, I want to say, like, just take the phone. You know, we have to call our governor. We have to let our governor know that it is not okay for our state to reopen our doors of every single business and open everything without ensuring that we have a law that will be enforceable. New York HERO is that. So we want you to call the governor, ensure that there is safety and protections for workers, sign the bill intact as it is, and the number to call is 518-474-8390. Calling the governor and letting him know that this is going to be not only important for New York, but for the entire country is what he needs to hear. And
we'll make sure we get that number out on social media so folks can pick the phone up and give them a call. Also, I would suggest sending a tweet over to the governor at NYGovCuomo. We'll make sure we get that out so folks can do it as well. But Maritza, I appreciate you taking some time filling us in, and I hope the best that the governor does come through, and I hope you guys win on this. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Rick. We'll hope next time we talk, we have a lot in place.
There you go. Good stuff. Maritza Silva-Farrell, Executive Director of Align New York, Coordinator of New York Essential Workers Coalition. Make sure you check out their website, alignny.org, protectnewyorkheroes.org as well. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show for working people on the talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That evening, a workers' rally in Chicago, Illinois, became known as the Haymarket Tragedy. On May 1st, workers across the city and around the country held massive rallies for the 8-hour workday. 2 days later, the police had fired into a crowd of workers on strike outside the McCormick Reaper plant in the Chicago neighborhood of Pilsen. 2 workers were slain and many more were injured. Angry workers called a rally at the city's Haymarket Square to protest the police violence and to call for the 8-hour day. When the police attempted to disband the rally as it was ending, an unknown person threw a dynamite bomb into the ranks of the advancing police. In their confusion, the police began firing their weapons. A total of 7 policemen were killed and an unknown number of workers were struck. In the aftermath of the bombing, union offices and labor papers were raided throughout the city. 8 vocal supporters of the workers' movement were put on trial. 4 of the men, Albert Parsons, August Spies, George Engel, and Adolf Fischer, were sentenced to death by hanging. A 5th man, Louis Ling, died under mysterious circumstances in prison. Historian Bill Edelman explained the importance of Haymarket, saying, "No single event has influenced the history of labor in Illinois, the United States, and even the world more than the Haymarket Affair. It began with a rally on May 4th, 1886, but the consequences are still being felt today." Although the rally is included in American history textbooks, very few present the event accurately or point out its significance. Throughout the world, the Haymarket martyrs are remembered, and May Day is celebrated as International Workers' Day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, horrible tragedy in Mexico City last night. One of the rail cars, I guess one of the bridges collapsed. 24 people killed as the overpass just collapsed. And immediately, of course, my heart goes out to the families who lost loved ones and all the people who are going to suffer from this. But, my mind went to this place. Could you have, rebuilt that sooner? And does it always take tragedy for us to do the things that we should have been doing all along? Because, I read the story and it's, this couple's, I guess, like 5 decades old. I think they said what this was. I'm going, I guess maybe it's just not us, but it's anyone. Do we have to wait for tragedy? Just a horrible thing. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on this tragedy and also some of rebuilding our needs. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's good to be with you tonight.
So let's start with this tragedy in Mexico City. I mean, I hate using it kind of as the story lead, but it seems like the only time we ever want to repair something is when some horrible tragedy happens.
Yeah, and obviously, the loss of life, the injuries are extraordinarily painful for the families and friends of those who unfortunately were impacted by this. But you're absolutely right. I think all around the world, including in the United States, we take things for granted. And I can think of a few situations here, like the Flint water crisis, which was literally sickening people, or the I-35 bridge collapse in Minneapolis, to get us to focus for a bit of time on some of these challenges. And I think one of the lessons for policymakers is don't delay. I mean, there's no upside to it. More of this will happen. We have tens of thousands of bridges that are not in good shape. We have lots of other types of infrastructure. I mean, we've just, I know that we've just over the past few months talked about, there's a levee in Florida. There was one in Michigan. And all of this has profound consequences. So when people worry about the cost of infrastructure, it's the cost of inaction that is far greater.
Yep.
And by that, I mean the risk that you're imparting on American citizens and folks who utilize these systems and depend on them functioning. And then, when you have to repair something, it's significantly more expensive than either doing preventative maintenance or having a quality piece of infrastructure in the first place, instead of just going with the cheapest bid. I mean, I respect cost. I don't think that we should overlook cost at all, but I think we have to put it into context where I want the best infrastructure. I want the infrastructure that's going to keep me safe. It's going to keep America safe. It's going to keep our families safe, that we don't even have to think about again for a while.
Yeah.
That to me is the most important thing. So I'm happy that the Biden administration is talking with Republicans about whether some sort of compromise is possible, but we should not compromise two things. Number one is the breadth. Don't let them define what infrastructure is. Infrastructure is everything now. It is broadband. It is school construction. It is building out an energy network and an energy grid, in addition to kind of the traditional bridges and roads. And don't let Republicans define what too much is. Because if you look at the American Society for Civil Engineers, we have trillions of dollars of unmet needs. So there's literally, you'd have to go pretty high to get an amount of money that is too much. And Biden's plan isn't even there.
Right.
Biden's plan will upgrade our infrastructure considerably across the board, but it's not too much. In fact, it's not enough in a lot of ways to get us to an A+ rating across the board within a few years. We're not there. We're struggling at C-. In some cases, we're lower than that.
No, we've got a lot of work to do. And about 10 years ago, I had pitched an idea to my building trades friends, of creating an app that every time you go over a structurally deficient bridge, it would send you a text going, "Hey, call mom. You might not make it to the other side." Because there are so many of them here in Pennsylvania and across the country. I don't know that you could get anywhere without being just inundated with, "Hey, pay attention. This bridge has got a weight restriction. This bridge is, this old." I mean, I think we have to start thinking about how outdated our infrastructure really is, and get us moving in the direction that we need to upgrade. Now, the White House came out with a tweet. All investments in the American Jobs Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America that create American jobs. To me, music to my ears.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we talked last week about the momentum going for Buy American, the fact that Celeste Drake, a good friend of your shows and a friend of mine, has been named the Made in America director at the White House, which is obviously fabulous news. And the other aspect of this is that I think more Americans, whether it's because of the pandemic and the shortages and the vulnerabilities that exposed, or some of the supply chain craziness that folks have seen, or real concerns, I think, about the rise of China. And I want to be clear, this isn't about some sort of jingoism or being afraid of Chinese people. Not at all. This is specifically about the actions of their autocratic government and Xi Jinping, and how that China wants to become more self-sufficient and also expand its reach in ways that violate our norms. There's not the respect for the environment or for human rights that we traditionally, when America is at its best, have tried to encourage around the world. And so I do think that it's incumbent on us not only to think big in terms of the spending, and also think big in terms of how we think about infrastructure, but also to think about the opportunities that infrastructure could mean for factories across this country. The steel makers that can supply that structural steel for the bridges, or the energy companies that are poised to outfit our electrical charging stations, vehicle charging stations around the country, and everything in between there. There are many opportunities. And when you said the app, it brought up another issue for me, is that, for those who say, well, we should get it from China because they can do it cheaper, the materials. A few years ago, California was rebuilding the Bay Bridge that had been completely wrecked in 1989 earthquake, and it took them a long time to kind of figure out how to redo this span. And Arnold Schwarzenegger at the time, who's viewed as a kind of a wise gentleman now. It's been a bizarre transformation for him, but he was the governor. He wanted to make a deal with China, and so he said, we're going to have a Chinese factory build this bridge, rebuild the Bay Bridge, and because it's going to save us money. Well, it turns out the bridge was delayed because they didn't know how to build it correctly. They didn't know how to do the steel. Ended up being way over budget. Cost more than it would have to invest in a facility in the United States to do this. And so we put billboards around that bridge, essentially protesting it and saying that we ought to keep our bridges made in the United States as a reminder. And we said, if a politician tries to do this again, they're going to get the billboard treatment from us, Rick, if they're trying to build a bridge. And so there have been some good examples of this, like the Tappan Zee Bridge in New York, just north of New York City, maybe 40 miles or so. Heavily trafficked bridge was built with American steel, proudly, and obviously with union labor and everything else built into that, but with American steel fabricators. And so we showed it could be done. And that's what we should do moving ahead.
No, and that's an excellent example of, you have these two situations where one, you tried to go the China route, the cheap route. They actually brought in Chinese welders to do the work because they could get around prevailing wage laws. Where you look at the New York situation, they did the entire thing with union labor under a project labor agreement. They came in ahead of time and under budget, as I understand it. So for me, that's kind of the gold standard we should be shooting for.
Yeah, and so when Biden says buy American, I say thumbs up. That's the way to go. You're going to get quality. You're going to create jobs here with your infrastructure investment, in addition to getting some desperately needed roads, bridges, schools, broadband, everything else that we're looking at in this infrastructure package.
But you look at the security grid, you look at the electric grid, you look at broadband, you look at a lot of this stuff, and I'm like, okay, you don't want to put that in infrastructure? I'm okay with it. I'm okay with you deciding that that's not real infrastructure. I say we put that in our defense budget because that's a national security issue to me. Keeping the lights on and not having another country hack into our grid and shut things down, to me, that's a national security issue. 5G technology, I'm sorry, I don't want China having control of that. That's a national security issue. So if you don't want to do it in the infrastructure, I'm okay with it. Let's do it through defense.
Yeah, I agree. We should get it done. And if it's something that the Republicans say, forget it, we'll agree to this, but not to that. We should do that anyway. And I say to them that infrastructure evolves. I mean, when our country was starting out, Alexander Hamilton had this radical idea to connect with canals and toll roads to so that our merchants could get goods to market and you could get agricultural products. And people like Jefferson said, no, we don't want to do that. but eventually that was part of infrastructure. And, railroads didn't exist. And so Abraham Lincoln comes along and says, let's do this transcontinental railroad. It's like infrastructure evolves. To me, it's anything that connects people and makes us delivers the goods and services that we need as Americans. So that's whether through our automobile, public transportation, over broadband, or with respect to water systems, or anything else. So that is all infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. But again, I keep coming back to this idea of national security because in my mind, we're already in the midst of a war with China. We're not firing bombs at each other, and I hope that never happens. But we are truly at war with them as they are controlling the supply chains. They are controlling the things that we need for our economy to function. And I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes piece over the weekend where they were talking about Intel and the semiconductors and the chips that we need for our auto industry, for everything, and how we make almost none anymore. We used to make, something like 40%. It's down to like 12% now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were at the forefront of semiconductor innovation and development, obviously. And then we let the production slip away. And you're right, in about 1990, we made about 37% of the world supply of advanced semiconductors. Now we make maybe 12%, and the needs of the market has grown substantially, and we just haven't invested here. I remember the Andy Grove, who's I think perhaps the most famous CEO of Intel, and they've had some good ones. They had Brian Krasanich was on the American Jobs committee that Trump formed with me. He resigned early, as did I, when Charlottesville happened. So these guys actually, I think, know what they're talking about. They're willing to take some risks. But Andy Grove, I think one of the original CEOs of Intel, said many years ago that we've lost our ability to produce in the United States, and it is a security risk. And it was very provocative at the time, and now people are like, well, of course that's the case. And it takes intention and it takes policy. It takes policy. We want to make it here. Not only do we want the Intels and the Apples to design things here, we want them to make it here as well. So I'm glad to see Intel's investment. We need a lot more of that, Rick.
No, especially because you saw the story today that the UAW is saying, look, you're going to make electric vehicles. You got to make them right here. You got to assemble them right here in the U.S. If we can't get the chips and the things to make the electric vehicles run and the batteries and all of that stuff, and we got to be dependent on China for those things, we're going to lose that battle every time.
Yeah, that's right. And it's alarming because GM and Ford, while they are making investments in the United States, and I salute them for that, they're also making investments in Mexico to build electric vehicles. And car makers across the board, both those supported by the Chinese government and some outside of it, are planning to build 8 new electric vehicle factories in China. That's more than the U.S. and Europe combined over the next year. China already controls 70% of the lithium-ion battery production, a lot of the rare earth minerals that we all depend on that go into this type of specialized equipment. And so we have a lot of work to do, both to make sure that there's a level playing field, but also to provide the incentives to build the demand to make these vehicles of the future right here in the United States. So I think that's absolutely right. If you want that $7,500 tax credit for your electric vehicle, it damn well be better made in the United States of America.
No, I'm right there with you, but it begs you to go, how did we get so badly screwed in this deal? How is it that we've given so much leverage and power to China, and how were we so blind at the wheel? It's just amazing to me, and obviously something we will pick up at another time. But Scott, I appreciate the time. As always, great work you guys do there at the Alliance for American Manufacturing. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rick, of course, and be well.
You as well. Good stuff. Our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out their website, AmericanManufacturing.org. Lots of good information there on trade, on Buy American, something I'm a big supporter of. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. This was one of the most significant days in U.S. labor history. A mass meeting of workers was called for that night in Chicago's Haymarket Square. The purpose of the meeting was to protest the police brutality that had killed and injured strikers at the McCormick Reaper plant the day before. Rally organizers were part of the movement demanding an 8-hour day. The rally was much smaller than organizers had expected. Rain began to fall as the last speaker was finishing when an army of 200 policemen appeared demanding the meeting disperse. Someone, unknown to this day, threw a dynamite bomb into the ranks of the advancing police. In the confusion of the moment, police began firing their weapons indiscriminately into the dark. When the smoke cleared, police had killed at least 4 in the crowd and wounded many more. A total of 7 policemen were killed. Most were killed by their own gunfire. In the aftermath of the event, unions were raided all across the country. The 8-hour movement was effectively derailed. 8 men were put on trial in Chicago. Some were not even present at the time the bomb was thrown. They were put on trial for their ideas. 4 of the men, Albert Parsons, August Spies, George Engel, and Adolf Fischer, were sentenced to death by hanging. A 5th man, Louis Ling, died under mysterious circumstances in prison. The remaining 3 went to prison and were eventually pardoned by Illinois Governor Altgeld in 1893. Before he was hung, August Spies declared, "The day will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you strangle today." His words proved true. The Haymarket Martyrs inspired and continue to inspire labor activists throughout the world. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
These days, the haughty rich in our country have developed such an arrogant sense of self-entitlement that they've gone from being merely irritating to infuriating. Unsurprisingly, their plutocratic greed and rigging of the system has generated a political backlash, including a widely popular push to tax the massive stashes of wealth the upper class has amassed by stiffing the middle class and poor. Alarmed by this uprising, the rich have launched a major effort to diffuse public anger, not by altering their own behavior, but by a semantical twist. Interestingly, since the rich has become such a negative phrase, it is being dropped from the vocabularies of right-wing media, lawmakers, and other defenders of wealth concentration. Rather, they now glorify the millionaire-billionaire class as, quote, high earners and high net worth individuals. Both are awkward phrases, yet both serve to exalt the fortunate few as superior earners and worthy individuals. Words matter because they're powerful social constructs that shape our culture's moral values. For example, even failed CEOs who preside over big losses still collect boodles of cash from the corporate hierarchy, while working stiffs who perform their jobs admirably at the same corporation get pay cuts or even get booted. Boeing, for instance, suffered $12 billion in losses last year, costing 30,000 workers their jobs, yet the top exec was rewarded with $21 million in pay. The establishment media cloaked the greed of the chief by saying he had earned his millions and is now worth such and such money. This is Jim Hightower saying these aren't euphemisms, they're lies. To get the truth, the media might ask ousted workers how much they think the CEO actually earned and is worth. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I happened to catch 60 Minutes the other night, and it was one of these things where the 2 stories that caught my attention were both China-centric. There was Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, his piece where he said China's acting more repressively at home and more aggressively abroad, which means they're cracking down on being much more authoritative, and which means not good for us. Horrible for their people, but not great for us either. But also the other part about the supply chain. The fact that, we make almost no chips. Our economy is dependent on it. And I keep coming back to, we should, if we can't agree on infrastructure, including broadband access, our electrical grid, then we have to do this as part of our defense budget because it's part of national security. We cannot cede these things to China or a hostile nation. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the 60-minute pieces, I've asked our good friend Emily Bruyere to come talk with us. She's the co-founder of Horizon Advisory, their website, horizonadvisory.com. Emily, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So this Blinken thing, are we surprised by his admission? I mean, this is the Secretary of State of the United States coming out and saying China's acting more repressive at home and more aggressively abroad. I think that's a huge statement.
Oh, yes. And I think it is a huge statement and a remarkable one now, just as it has been for the past 3 months. The tone that this administration is clearly willing to take on China is pretty remarkable and I think surprising. And I think just as surprising was the tone of the 60 Minutes reporting, which also seemed entirely on board with this kind of rhetoric. and willing to present it as fact, which is, I mean, all of this is a huge departure from, even just a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, are we ramping up? Are we getting people prepared for the potential possibility of a war? I mean, the fact that anyone's talking about the possibility of actual war is quite remarkable.
Yes, and it's no longer an insane thing to say that China is our adversary, which again, it was just a few years ago.
No, I would argue they've always been. I don't know when this kumbaya stuff began or ended. They've always been an adversary. They've always been the communist China. Just because they adhere to capitalist principles of greed and hoarding and screwing workers over doesn't make them our friends.
Yes, and they've always been intent on taking over the world order, but we have this idea that because we believe in free markets and a rules-based order, we have to cooperate with every country and their brother. But back to the war question, I think you said it well in, I think, the last segment. We are at war, and we have been. And I mean, yes, there was conversation in this interview about China's military buildup and its military aggression and the Taiwan threat. But what would be really great would be for everybody to wake up to the fact that China has been engaged in commercial and industrial war with the U.S. and with the world order for decades.
And they also talked about chip production and semiconductor stuff and how, and I think what we've learned through this pandemic, as I said before, is our supply chains are very thin. And we've basically just allowed China to co-opt all of that, and we've sold it off for trinkets. And we're in a desperate moment, and they know it. And, as I'm looking at this stuff, I'm going, this is a national security issue. Of course, China is going to be much more aggressive, much more willing to push us, and over the South Pacific, over the islands there, over Taiwan. We can make threats all we want. Are we really going to go in with the military to defend Taiwan? I don't think so.
Yes, and are we really going to take the measures we need to take now to ensure that Taiwan's defense is credible and Taiwan has a voice in the world stage? I don't think so. We haven't to date. But then also, I mean, you framed it, I think, perfectly right there. We've talked about this before, but China is willing to mix its commercial warfare, supply chain leverage, and coercion with its military engagement. And this is a Chinese strategy of military-civil fusion in which those domains, their tools, their actors, but also the ultimate goals and kinds of power that they develop, those are all fused in a integrated Chinese conception that's premised on developing global power and coercive leverage.
Yeah.
And so we're out there, trying to figure out what is national security, what is not national security, what is warfare, what is not warfare. But these are all together under one umbrella for Beijing.
Yeah, but for me, the idea that they're eating our lunch, they are being, some of the human rights abuses at home. I mean, they're basically torturing their own people and treat their own people poorly, and basically are now thumbing their nose at us. And I had someone tell me that, well, we're now taking this position on China because of the last guy, because of Trump's rhetoric. And I would argue that the reason that we're finally waking up and paying attention to just how bad China is screwing us over is because of the last guy's failure to deal with the pandemic that highlighted our dependency on China and their supply chain. And which is why I think now a lot of people are going, hey, this has gone too far. We got to fix this now. At least that's my thought. I'm curious yours.
I mean, I think we've been, needless to say, we've been caught in this roller coaster of the past year and a half or whatever it is, where we have constant whiplash because the world is turning 720 degrees in its axis at every second, and it's overwhelming. But if we just take a step back and look at what's happened over the past 18 months and China's role in all of that, you get a pretty insane picture. You get Beijing's cover-up of a global pandemic, at the very least, and which then allows it to turn into a global pandemic. You get China's stockpiling PPE to prevent any other country from responding. You get China then blaming the pandemic on every other possible country and refusing to allow, or to create transparency within its own system so we can look at the origins of the pandemic. And you get increased information about a genocide against an ethnic minority in China. You get China stockpiling critical materials that threaten our supply chains and force our auto factories to shut down. You get every possible move that a global spoiler / adversary could make. So, I mean, yes, we're realizing the narrative right now about China coming out of this administration is because of a very clear picture in front of us that's getting clearer and clearer and clearer by the day.
So whose fault is this? Because here's the thing. I guess it's my Catholic upbringing. I always blame myself. So, of course, I internalize all this stuff, and I think it's our fault. I think every bit of this is our fault.
I mean, there's no doubt, right, that China's good. Like, they have a good strategically.
They play the chess game better than we do. They're literally whipping us on the chessboard.
Exactly. But yes, we absolutely let this happen. We're the global leader. We have been for decades. We have every possible advantage an incumbent power could have. We've shaped the global system. We have architectural influence in it. And yet we have been not only so blind to what the competition is and what Beijing's doing, but we've also done half the damage to ourselves. Like, China hasn't had to do it. I keep coming back to this because I've been saying this for years, that we can't continue to give our manufacturing base away to China. We can't continue to have deindustrialization policies that give all of our ability to produce away. And it's only because, I remember stories my grandparents' generation told us about how, when World War II started, they were able to turn those factories that were making cars and all kinds of things into factories that were making planes and tanks and guns. We don't have the kind of production capability in this country right now to ramp up for a major kind of war. Not that we would go back to that possibly, but we don't have the production capability, even if we did, and China knows that. Correct. And then when you look at how we lost that, it's not that Beijing came in here and stole it. It's that greedy CEOs. Yeah, they handed it over in every case. Every industry that has been crippled by China just handed over its own industrial base to Beijing. Now, I've got listeners who they're probably jumping up and down right now going, it's Bill Clinton. Because I got one guy who everything is Bill Clinton's fault. And now understand, not a Clinton fan. Not on any real level, didn't bring me strike replacement, signed NAFTA, signed welfare reform, signed the telecom bill of 96, destroyed Glass-Steagall. We can go through all the horrible of Bill Clinton, but he wasn't alone in this hat trick of horrible that's given away our manufacturing base and basically gutted our industrial sector. He wasn't alone. This was a bipartisan effort. Yes, and the government wasn't the check that it should have been, and the conscience that our private sector needed, but also our private sector has cannibalized itself and continues to do so in a really remarkable way. Like, if you look at the auto industry, which should really have seen over the past decades China gradually eating its lunch, now that we're in an EV revolution, it seems like they're just turning to the old playbook of letting China dominate the industry chain, obtain the technology, and leapfrog in an emerging industry. I mean, this, the electric vehicle is going to be the vehicle of the future. I think everybody understands that, whether someone want to agree with it or not, that is going to happen. And you've got the head of the UAW going, hey, we should be making that here. And I'm going, how can you make it here when you don't have the things that you need, like the batteries or the semiconductors or any of that stuff? How can you? Because we've allowed corporate CEOs in their narrow short-term interest of corporate quarterly profits to line their pockets, to abandon this country and end up in China where they can exploit labor and they can exploit lax environmental regulations, also that they can on a short-term basis make more. And as you've just said, they still haven't learned the lesson. They're still doing it. Yeah. And as you can tell, I get really angry about this because at some point you go, if you keep, it's that hitting your head against the wall thing.
Two things, you keep doing the same dumb thing over and over again, you get the same results. But when you stop banging your head against the wall, it feels much better. Maybe we should stop.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? And also, like, okay, so take this electric vehicle example, right? China has like very explicitly prioritized EVs for the past over a decade, in large part because Beijing sees these as its opportunity to take over a field that historically has been dominated by incumbent players. It's hard to become a dominant OEM, even if China can cannibalize the auto parts, the semiconductor supply chain. But in a new industrial revolution and in EVs, Beijing can absolutely leapfrog. And it sees like a blank slate and a relatively even playing field in which it could compete. In theory, we should kind of have that same approach too, right? Where we say, look, we've lost all these industry chains. We no longer necessarily have control. Oh, here's a revolutionary period, a relative blank slate. Let's use this as a chance to build back better and actually have control over our industrial inputs. And instead, as you said, that dent in the wall is just getting bigger and bigger.
So let me ask you the other side of this, because at some point we're a war society. We as Americans, we like our wars. We've had enough. We've had enough of them. Can't we frame this in terms of this is we're in an economic war. I think Blinken said that they're not trying to contain China, to hold it back, to keep it down, but we're trying to uphold the rules-based order. And he went on to say that, China doing all the things they're doing, they're the one country in the world that has the military, economic, diplomatic capacity to undermine or challenge the rules-based order that we care so much about. Can't we say, look, at some point, China cheats on their currency. China cheats on every front. They exploit their labor. They're destroying the environment. All of these things. Can't we frame this in a way we're trying to save ourselves and the planet on some level and turn it into a kind of a war rhetoric so idiots get behind it instead of going, oh, we just get cheap stuff from Walmart?
Yes. There's a question that Blinken got asked in that interview and that comes up a lot, which is that China is long-termist and it's strategic, and the U.S. isn't. And so how is the U.S. ever possibly going to be able to compete? And I think the answer is that, yeah, U.S. non-strategic, we never think in the long term, but we can be dynamic. And when we actually recognize the need, we can flip on a switch and turn things on. And I mean, that's precisely the example you said about World War II industrial production and wartime mobilization. We might not have that industrial capacity right now, but that's a clear example of us being able to switch into gear. And that's something that China can't rival, and it's pretty remarkable from a U.S. perspective, but we actually have to have the motivation to do that, and then to have a playbook of what we do. And I think right now, we should have this wartime messaging because we are in a war, and that it's just a new kind. And I think that's being realized. And I think this, the Biden administration is doing a fantastic job of messaging it. However, we don't have a playbook for this kind of context because it's new. And right now, we're not going to win by just producing a bunch of jets in our factories that can't even produce the jets because China has the semiconductors. So if we're going to get that kind of mobilization and rapid response and actual mass social willingness to engage in the competition that we have to engage in, if we're going to preserve the global order and our own national security and prosperity, then we have to know what it actually means to do that. Which, talk about that one.
I'm with you. I have people who all the time are saying, well, the last guy, the former guy, he took China on. He was tough on China. I'm going, no, I think he made things worse. He identified the problem. Congratulations. The blind squirrel found a nut. But I don't think he did anything to move us anywhere closer towards confronting China. In fact, I think he was played as the useful dolt that he was.
And look at how far we still have to go, right? Over the past however many years, China has continued to make the inroads in critical industry chains, but also in our financial sector, in our narrative sector, and also has been able to transfer those positions into influence over the global system and its rules, and to shape rules in its interests, and also to drive a wedge between us and our allies. And yes, the past 4 years, we did get a change in narrative. Has the problem been addressed? Not really.
No, but and you and I have had this conversation before, and I'm looking at Biden's jobs plan, this $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan. And part of me is looking at this as a way to go, we're going to spend a lot of money domestically to build up our manufacturing base. And this isn't something that I think anybody's really talking about that I think is important. I think if you were to come out and say, look, this jobs plan is really about national security. It is about bringing back those industries. It's about, making sure that we have the ability to make the chips that we need, the lithium batteries that we need, the steel that we need. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that sells better. Maybe we don't get mired in this, you're just a liberal wish list. Maybe we make this about, hey, this is about national security. In fact, we need more than 2.3 trillion. We need like 4 trillion to be able to rebuild our infrastructure, and infrastructure being manufacturing as well.
Yes. And I mean, the reasoning for that, like from the adversarial informed perspective, is so incredibly clear. We know that China uses its control over supply chains and industry chains for coercive leverage. We saw that in 2010 with Japan and rare earths. We're seeing it now with semiconductors. We've seen it with medical supplies. Like, there's no doubt that not only is this a vulnerability, but China is willing to exploit it for its own ends. And there's also like a whole strain in Chinese strategic discourse about how those basic foundational industrial and technological inputs are N times more important than the high-end, high-value add, flashy advances built on top of them. Because you can't get to any of those advances, you can't get anywhere if you don't have the basic foundation. And so China is controlling that intentionally for strategic ends, and with the clear willingness to use that kind of power to force us into a corner.
The last question I've got for you, Brookings foreign policy Twitter account tweeted out this Michael O'Hanlon quote. He said, "A promise by America to defend Taiwan does not mean that it could defend it." He writes, America needs a better offensive campaign plan. The most promising strategy would center on all-out economic warfare against China. Is that what you see as the only way forward, or as one of the main ways forward?
100%. We need to realize this is a war. It's a different kind of war. And that means treating our economic interdependence as a competition.
So as a union guy, as a Made in America guy, the thing that I've been talking about for all the 16 years I've been doing this program is every time I pick something up to buy it, I check where it was made. I buy the product that's made in the U.S. If I have a choice between something made in the U.S. and made in China, 100% of the time I'll pay the extra buck and I will buy the thing made in the U.S. And there's part of me that goes, this should be the patriotic call of this moment.
Absolutely. And also be messaged as that. It should be clear when you go to buy something where it's from without you having to turn it over and look for the fine print. Yeah. And also without that fine print really getting away with murder in terms of labeling itself something it's not.
That is a whole nother conversation for another day, and I'm sure we will pick that up another time. But Emily, I appreciate your time. Always great talk with you, and always concerning and angering as well.
Always great being on. Thank you.
Appreciate your time, Emily. Make sure you check out the website, Emily's website at horizonadvisory.org. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at that. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing.
Biden makes history with climate-focused congressional address.
Drilling also releases another potent greenhouse gas, methane.
New report finds reduction of methane crucial for climate. Plus, Washington State passes landmark cap-and-trade law.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
He wants control of your life. He's going to control how much meat you can eat. Can you imagine that?
No, I can't imagine that because it's not true, because you're making it up, Kevin McCarthy, and you know you're making it up because it's been debunked days ago, yet you keep saying it. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, you have been delighted for days about this since Biden's address. It was historic, particularly from a climate perspective.
Indeed it was. President Joe Biden's address to a joint session of Congress on his 99th day in office late last week was historic. For the first time, man-made climate change was woven throughout a State of the Union or equivalent speech as a core part of economic policy, foreign policy, and job creation.
Biden lover.
Biden's climate policies depend heavily on Congress passing his $2 trillion American Jobs Plan proposal to rebuild the nation's crumbling infrastructure and shift to clean energy. He characterized it as crucial to stay competitive with China, which is investing twice as much as the U.S. in clean technology. And he pitched it to union members, a key voting bloc, name-checking the IBEW union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers.
American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market.
Biden's joint address to Congress could mark a turning point for the U.S. and the world if his climate policies are translated into broad action.
Oh, that's a big if.
Indeed it is. On Monday, Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell surprised no one in announcing that no Republicans will vote for Biden's jobs plan, no matter what is in it, making West Virginia's conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin an incredibly powerful figure determining the course of future U.S. climate action.
Long may he reign.
Meanwhile, the Transportation Department is moving forward, announcing the administration will jumpstart construction of new interstate electric transmission lines to distribute clean energy across the country, avoiding delays and disputes by siting lines along existing federal rights-of-ways and highways.
Do you need special electric lines to transmit clean energy versus regular old dirty energy?
Yes, you do, because high voltage transmission lines are way better at carrying energy over really, really long distances.
Huh. Who knew?
A new report by the American Council on Renewable Energy has identified 22 shovel-ready grid transmission projects across the country that they say would increase wind and solar generation by 50% in the U.S. and create 1.2 million jobs. In other news, Senate Democrats late last week voted to reinstate Obama-era regulations limiting methane emissions from the oil and gas industry using the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress a short window to rescind regulations passed by a previous administration.
Well, that's about time, Democrats.
Yes, and it matters, because methane, the principal component in natural gas, is a more potent climate-warming gas than carbon dioxide on shorter timescales, and the oil and gas industry is a primary source. The New York Times reports that a new draft study by the United Nations warns that slashing methane emissions is far more important to slowing man-made global warming than previously thought, and plugging fossil fuel industry leaks has the biggest potential to slow emissions both efficiently and cheaply.
And that is a huge part of the Biden American Jobs Plan.
Exactly. Moving swiftly to cut human-caused methane emissions from the most polluting industries, fossil fuels, landfills, and agriculture, could slow the rate of global warming almost immediately by as much as 30%, buying us some time, and overall would avoid about 1/3 of a degree Celsius of global warming by the 2040s.
It is maddening that these old drilling platforms are leaking methane. They're not even giving us oil or gas. They're just making the climate worse.
And on public lands, they're actually wasting the public's natural gas when they flare it into the atmosphere.
Ah, yes, that too.
And finally, Washington State's Democratic majority state legislature finally passed a bill to establish a cap and trade system to cut the state's carbon emissions. It'll be the second state after California to do so. The system requires polluters to pay for their carbon pollution and will launch in 2023.
Make them pay. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So President Biden today said the administration's new goal is 70% of American adults vaccinated by the 4th of July. So you can go and have the picnics and all of the stuff and, somewhat back to normal. 70%. Is that ambitious? Especially after yesterday, the fact that you had experts saying they doubt we're going to get to herd immunity because of people who have vaccine hesitancy. It's not that they're just morons. They have vaccine hesitancy. And here to share some thoughts on, do we get to 70% by the 4th of July? And do we have a bunch of morons who can keep us from that? I've asked our good friend and resident expert, Dr. Kelly Senholz, to come talk with us. Dr. Senholz, thanks for taking time for us.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Is 70%, is that overly ambitious? Or do you think we can get there? 70% of adults here in this country vaccinated by the 4th of July.
I think it's interesting. I think the meeting of the Facebook board is going to have a lot to do with whether we can meet it. If we have a situation where the former guy is allowed to start blaring again, it really could inhibit our ability to reach that.
Yeah, because, again, yesterday I led in with this vaccine hesitancy nonsense, which, I got to tell you, I always love good, soft American language, always making excuses for moronic behavior. Did they have? I wonder if they had vaccine hesitancy back when they were giving out polio vaccines. Because evidently we're okay with having a little bit of COVID. Back then they didn't go, hey, we can get along with a little polio. A little polio won't kill you.
No, the lines for the polio vaccine were down the street in every town, every city. People were crying in relief that they could prevent themselves from getting this terrible disease that leads to long-term consequences. And now we have a terrible disease that kills people and leads to long-term consequences. And we've got crazy people saying they don't want to help us get past this.
No, they suffer from hesitancy, Kelly. They suffer from hesitancy. And again, I come back to the use of words. Hesitancy, really?
So from my viewpoint, it appears that they use those soft words when they're talking about white supremacists. And it's now that I've read more over the last 4 years and learned more about the role of racism and the basis of our nation, I noticed when we talk about the police and they've just killed the kid, and it's like, well, he was afraid. It's like, no, he killed a kid. Whenever it comes to the white supremacists, we get this soft wording. It's pretty obscene.
Yeah. Also, we do protect the stupid. Because look, I've said, look, there's part of me that goes, I don't care if they get the vaccine or not. Hopefully all of us, the sane, rational among us, will be protected. And look, if they want to get it and they want to go, go. But I have people always come back and say, no, because, there are going to be people who aren't stupid, who are going to have problems. We need everybody on board. We need to encourage people to come around. And in fact, there are states and in local governments who are, incentivizing getting the vaccine, offering to give money, offering to give drinks. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ideas. Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia, has given out $100 savings bond, trying to bribe people into doing what's in their best interest.
It is true, though, that the divide in our country is not just between the rich and the poor, but it's between the educated, intelligent people and the people that watch Honey Boo Boo. It really, that divide has also been getting wider and wider over time. And there is some, we need to bring them along. If we have a nation of separate, not very smart people, and then the rest of us. It's just that chasm is going to grow and grow and cause more problems. So we need to pull them along and get them to start mimicking the words and get them to say, I've seen a little bit of it. I've seen a little bit of change. And I liken it to the fact that they're not getting Trump words and QAnon stuff fed to them 24/7.
Right, that's an excellent point.
It's made a big difference.
Yeah, I guess watching YouTube clips of Honey Boo Boo, that isn't research.
I never watched Honey Boo Boo, but I can just picture the whole thing.
Yeah, I only remember the commercials. I never watched it either, but I saw the commercials of just an out of control kid who, the parents, as I remember, had no control over the kid whatsoever. And she was the little snot that, anyway, that's a whole nother discussion for another day. Let's get back to the vaccines. Because like I said, there are a lot of states who are trying to incentivize, people, doing what's in their best interest. Are you in favor of the idea of bribing people into doing what's in their best interest?
It's a little uncomfortable, isn't it? I'm not so upset about the like shot in a beer kind of things, because it's such a small thing and it does make it fun. It adds a little bit of joviality to the whole thing. But when you start giving away $100 savings bonds and things, you're kind of crossing a line. People should do it because it's the right thing to do. That it's good for their neighbors, it's good for them, it's good for their family. It's the smart thing to do. It's the decent thing to do. And if we have to bribe people into decency, it's just sad.
But I listen to Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson tells me we don't know. We don't know what the side effects are going to be. We don't know how safe it is. We don't know, Kelly. We just don't know.
When I hear about Tucker Carlson, I just think there's a trust fund kid who went totally off the rails. Somebody obviously has something on that guy, and he's scared. Like, he goes to bed every night sweating and just terrified with his heart racing. Somebody's got something on him, and he has to go crazier and crazier every day to keep his audience and to keep people riled up. And I think that, there's some deep throat in a garage somewhere who meets him and says, Tucker, you know what's going to happen if you don't do it.
I love that impression. That's my favorite impression. I do bad impressions. That one was fabulous.
Well, I'm hopeful that we'll meet it, but I don't think we're going to meet it. We're going to get close, but I tell you what, I've seen interviews with nurses who are going out there just door to door and community to community, begging people to get the shots, educating them over and over. And I mean, when I listen to them, my heart is just like I just love them so much. I can't believe how much they're putting on the line emotionally and intellectually, because they know we need to get everybody vaccinated. The people that are out there vaccinating are the heroes right now.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this, because yesterday, obviously, the big news was that we're not going to whip this, that we're not going to reach herd immunity. It's with us. It's not going to disrupt our societal movements. It's just going to be a regular infectious disease that we're going to have to deal with. But it's not going anywhere, especially with the different variants. And in fact, I had a listener who pointed out to me that The variant that's in India has been spotted in Iowa. We may be down that road soon. So there's the talk of it's not going anywhere. You're the expert. How likely is it it's not going anywhere?
I believe we talked about this in March of 2020, that if the orange guy let this get out of control, the formation of mutations would cause an exacerbation of the problem and an extreme amount of infections. And unfortunately, it all came true. He never let up with his lies and his bleach and his craziness. And his people are still repeating all that stuff a year later.
Yeah, but he's the father of the vaccine, though, Kelly. He's the father of the vaccine.
I seem to remember the vaccine companies denying that, so I'm going to stick with them.
Don't you know he was in the garage? He was mixing, bleach and light, and he was doing all kinds of things. He had his little chemist hat on.
I got to tell you, I was around somebody today that was vaccinated, and there was a conversation in a normal part where you would just hug somebody. And I was like, I can hug you. And it was like, we both were like, yeah, and hugged. And it was like, it's so good. It's so good to be moving back toward normal.
Yeah.
The damage, the injury to our nation was done last year. That's why it was so angry and so insane, because I knew this was all going to happen. This didn't have to be written down. It was absolutely obvious. And now here we are. We should have had our virus under control last summer so that we could start reaching out to other countries like India and Pakistan and, all the countries that need help. And instead, we're still fighting our fight. And it hamstrung us. It damaged our nation. It damaged the world, and now we're all going to live with this forever because he did that.
Now, the story today out, Reuters had a story that Pfizer evidently claims that the vaccine demand for years into the future. They've had $26 billion in sales thus far this year. It's good time for profit. Isn't this one of these moments where we should be going, hey, our tax dollars created this. You shouldn't be profiting off of what our tax dollars created?
The biggest problem is that we pay for the research. We pay through our universities, through grants, through the NIH. We pay for all the research that goes into these drugs, and the drug companies just take that research, make it into a profitable item, and sell it. So the problem is we need to deal with that core issue of why we give away our research for free to these companies. And I don't see, we have so much on the plate right now. That's so far down the road. I think that the drug companies are just going to make a lot of money. I did hear another physician saying that they may combine the flu shot with the COVID shot so that you get both of them at once. That would be great. But besides that, I think we're stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that in a moment where the world needs it, them having a patent and profiting of. In fact, Pfizer claims that a third of their sales this year that are going to be because of the vaccine.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's an enormous number.
That's enormous, absolutely enormous. And, after, 5 years ago when we said some of these things and people were like, you're a conspiracy theorist. And now they're like, yeah, I wonder if something like that happened. We're never going to know the backdoor story. How did this all come about? How did those companies get picked for our vaccine? What kind of support did they receive? I mean, I feel like we're possibly never going to know that answer, but foundational issues with our pharmaceutical, line of production and marketing and distribution has has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I do give the former guy credit for, the one thing I do give Trump credit for, is he was willing to spend money on research, and they did. You could argue they did waste some of it probably on their cronies, and they had their hands in it, but they did spend a lot of money, and Democrats were right there to allow him to do that. It wasn't a political thing. They got it done, and I find it interesting that I don't know if you saw Tim Scott's response to Biden's congressional speech. But he highlighted the fact that, back when the former guy was president, we passed, relief bills in a bipartisan way. You go, yeah, because Democrats wanted to help people. There's a huge difference, buddy.
That dude has something deeply wrong with him. I don't know, but yeah, that was hilarious. I'm like, yeah, because we wanted a vaccine. That's correct.
Yeah.
And now the American people, by a 70% margin, say that the Republicans are not negotiating enough, they're not bending enough, that they need to change and do things differently. So I think I see little glimmers of light. I see, if the Dems don't overplay their hand, if they stay on track and do what's right, I think we're in for a long period of Democratic rule.
From your lips, I hope we get the things we need done, and the Democrats don't sell us out as they have done in the past as well. Got to keep them on the right path. I did want to get your thoughts though, as my medical expert here. Pfizer is looking for authorization for the vaccine to give to kids ages 2 to 11. Are we advising parents that we should be vaccinating kids 2 to 11 on this virus?
They're not yet, but that's coming, and it's absolutely a part of getting us far enough down the road that we'll be free of the pandemic. We have to get kids vaccinated. Something like a third of the people in our country are children, so we're not going to get to 70, 80, 90% vaccination rates until the kids are. I think two things have to happen. Yes, kids are going to have to get the vaccination, and studies are underway. Some of them are finishing up. So now we're down to, I think, 12 years old. But it will go all the way down to 2 years old and maybe even less. So we need to do that. We have to do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm looking at this, and I'm all on with the vaccines. I know that we need to get them. But there are some who are going, we've become a germ-phobic society, and you as a doctor can respond to this. We're so germ-phobic that once we go back to something near lives, we take off the masks, we start being exposed to other things, not COVID, but anything else. Our bodies are going to struggle because we haven't really, as George Carlin used to say, his body was tempered in raw sewage because he swam in the Hudson River, and his immune system was armed with 50 caliber machine guns. It killed everything because it got a lot of practice. Our body hasn't gotten a lot of practice at killing off some of these viruses and some of these diseases. Are we concerned about that?
We may have a little flare of colds and things, but I think more likely, all of our immune systems have a memory. So let's say you contract germ B, and then you don't contract it for a long time, but then you come in contact with it again. The memory cells in your body remember that germ, and they'll say, "Uh-oh, that's germ B," and they go after it. So a little bit maybe, but I think 1 year of being away from germs, for the most part, is not going to have a dramatic effect on most people's immune system.
Because most of the people I know are ready to forget the mask ever existed. They want to go back to the carefree lifestyle that they almost remember. And I fear we do this too quickly. And we have another spike of another variant or who knows what, and we
could have a spike of something. But if people will continue to wash their hands like they've been doing now, it would reduce the amount of infections people have. You would still come in contact with germs, but maybe not enough to make you sick, and maybe less than you would have otherwise. But it's not a bad thing. I don't think they need to be putting the germ alcohol solution on their hands all the time, but just basic hygiene, wash your hands, brush your teeth, all the stuff your mom taught you to do.
I'm glad you said that because one of the things that's happening right now, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, is anyone who is saying, hey, we need to take precautions, we need to get the vaccine, we need to do sane, rational things, are being painted as radicals, and they never want you to take the mask off, and they're never going to stop with the school closures, and they're never going to stop with the social distancing. They're virus Nazis. I'm glad to hear somebody going, no, once we get vaccinated, we can get back to something normal, but just do common sense, smart things. Washing your hands, I don't think is too onerous.
Well, and my response to that, which I get that comment a lot, is that, yes, you are the people that are so afraid of your shadow that you have to wear a machine gun on your back to go to the grocery store. I think you need to chill down a little bit here.
There you go. All righty, there you go. Simple stuff. And you would have thought they would have worn the mask on January 6th, so we wouldn't be able to identify them and throw them in jail. But I'm glad they didn't, because I'm very happy to see them go to jail. Anyway, Dr. Senholz, I appreciate the time as always. Excellent information, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
You as well, our good friend, Dr. Kelly Senholz. Look, and like I said, the idea is common sense, smart things. We're going to get past this, and I've been saying this all along. We'll get there. We'll get there. Just once we're all vaccinated, once we get to that point, we'll be all right. And look, I'm looking forward to this summer taking the kids to a couple of concerts that we've had tickets for from before the pandemic. That's going to happen. So just how it is. Love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That evening, a workers' rally in Chicago, Illinois, became known as the Haymarket Tragedy. On May 1st, workers across the city and around the country held massive rallies for the 8-hour workday. 2 days later, the police had fired into a crowd of workers on strike outside the McCormick Reaper plant in the Chicago neighborhood of Pilsen. 2 workers were slain and many more were injured. Angry workers called a rally at the city's Haymarket Square to protest the police violence and to call for the 8-hour day. When the police attempted to disband the rally as it was ending, an unknown person threw a dynamite bomb into the ranks of the advancing police. In their confusion, the police began firing their weapons. A total of 7 policemen were killed and an unknown number of workers were struck. In the aftermath of the bombing, union offices and labor papers were raided throughout the city. 8 vocal supporters of the workers' movement were put on trial. 4 of the men, Albert Parsons, August Spies, George Engel, and Adolf Fischer, were sentenced to death by hanging. A 5th man, Louis Ling, died under mysterious circumstances in prison. Historian Bill Edelman explained the importance of Haymarket, saying, "No single event has influenced the history of labor in Illinois, the United States, and even the world more than the Haymarket Affair. It began with a rally on May 4th, 1886, but the consequences are still being felt today." Although the rally is included in American history textbooks, very few present the event accurately or point out its significance. Throughout the world, the Haymarket martyrs are remembered, and May Day is celebrated as International Workers' Day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, the Show Me State, very angry still over the fact that his publisher canceled his book deal over, that little thing that happened on January 6th that he was, really, really hyping up. A little upset that they canceled, but he got another book deal, and he's been claiming that the media, they're trying to silence him. They're trying to silence his voice. So he's doing an interview with the Washington Post. Yes. He's doing a video interview with the Washington Post technology policy reporter, Kat Zaworski. And he tells her, now he's promoting his new book. He's telling her, don't you try and censor, cancel, or silence me here. You raise the issue. You got to listen to the truth. And first I listen to that and I go, I don't think anything coming out of your mouth is the truth. So I don't know that I'm going to listen to it at all. But she's sitting there going, Senator, we're hosting you here. You're here on this platform, the Washington Post. We're the evil media that you're railing about. You're here. We're covering this. You're being heard. How is it that and I just, my mind is going to this place of going, these folks have their narrative and they stick to it. You're canceling me. No. Sane, rational people should be canceling you because you're dangerous. And, I look at this and you go, there he is doing a media interview, claiming that the media is trying to cancel him. Crazy, crazy, crazy times for which we live in. Also, evidently our FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they claim that there's a massive spike in angry people doing stupid things. And it comes back to this mask thing. I'm like, how hard is it to sit on the plane and wear the mask? Now look, I'm a big guy sitting on the plane. I should be angry being crammed into these tiny little seats. They used to be bigger. The planes were smaller, the seats were bigger. Now the planes are enormous and the seats are tiny. That's something you should be upset about, not the fact that you got to wear a mask. What they said is, and I was shocked by this, they claim that in the past they'd have maybe 100, 150 cases of bad behavior. People assaulting a steward, a flight attendant, people being idiots, whatever. Getting drunk and starting to fight, whatever. Evidently, the number this year, since the start of this year, over 1,300 cases. And this is in a pandemic kind of squashed down kind of environment where you don't have maximum flights anymore. Imagine what's going to happen when the doors get swung open and you're still here. Now it's most of it's over the mask. You got these Karens and these Carls and these nitwits who, I've got rights. No, you don't. You don't have the right on a plane to do whatever you want. And you've got these flight attendants who are leaving the industry. You've got people who are just tired of it. And look, I wouldn't want to be in customer service at all, having to deal with some people. But they're now, according to the FAA, they're cracking down. There is a zero tolerance to poor behavior. And what I find interesting is this is one of those moments where, law enforcement in this country has had a zero tolerance for some groups, poor areas. Every infraction, everything is maximum penalties. Going to be interesting to see, the folks who can afford to fly, generally a little more well-to-do folks. Going to be interesting to see zero tolerance and how that affects how they're treated. So I'm really looking forward to some really, really good YouTube videos of angry people, I'm not wearing a mask, then being drug out and possibly there are going to be criminal charges, they're saying. Up to 35 grand in fines and possibly lifetime bans on airlines. I'm going, wow. I mean, we're not messing around. But here's the thing. In a normal year, you're talking about 100, 150 kind of claims. so far in this short year thus far, over 1,300. And in fact, our friend Sarah Nelson was the president of the Association of Flight Attendants. She was quoted in the piece saying that, and this, I can't imagine this, they got passengers urinating on the floor. They got a passenger spit in the mouth of a child on board a plane. And you go, what? How do you, I don't even know. But here's the thing. I'm all in favor of getting these self-entitled, self-centered morons off the planes. I would love to see massive fines. I would love to see criminal charges. I just think we need this. And look, sadly, most of the people that I talk to in customer service, it's not fun going to work. And I feel for them. We're definitely in interesting times. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We're going to be taking Thursday and Friday off. It is my vaccine day Thursday, so I'm planning on probably not feeling well, I'm told. So we're going to take Thursday and Friday of this week off, just so you can mark that on the calendar. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.